Hello, I'm Steve Maskery and welcome to Workshop Essentials. I want this wardrobe to look as if it could have been designed by Charles Rennie Mackintosh. I've always liked his work, and I was fortunate enough to visit the Glasgow School of Art before it was burnt down. Fantastic place. And it seems to me that he had two styles really. There was the sort of curvy, colourful style in his watercolours and some of his furniture, and then there was the more austere rectilinear features in different pieces of furniture. Now, I don't want to copy anything in particular, but I'm going to go for a combination of those two styles. I'm going to make it rectilinear like this, but I'm going to have some colour in it with this abalone shell. It's not real abalone, it's celluloid. They use it for like drum kits and guitars and guitar picks and things like that. But that will go behind there on the doors, and I think that's going to look really rather nice. This is the prototype, just made out of a bit of oak. And this took me best part of a day, really, to make the jig and to make this. And it was, every minute was well spent. It was well worth doing because I learnt such a lot about this particular construction. It's all halving joints and half laps. The first thing I discovered was that I originally designed it for these squares to be 25 millimeters. And as soon as I started cutting the notches, I could see that that was too small. So I've upped the size a little bit, and these are now 30 millimeters square. I also discovered that it makes a great deal of difference just how tight you make the joints. Now, we always want our joints to be solid, don't we? But if they are too tight on something this delicate, it can actually make the wood move. And this edge is not perfectly straight anymore, because each one of these notches, it was really tight, and it's just forced them open just a little tiny bit. So if I put them on my table saw, you can see that it does actually rock slightly. So these were too tight. This is the sled that I built to make these halving joints. And it's simply a board with a runner on the bottom, which rides in my mitre slot. And there's a fence across the front to which I can clamp a stop block so that everything gets lined up the same. It works quite well. Did that with it. Slides nicely. But there are a couple of things that could be improved upon. One is the guarding. It goes underneath the guard like that. It's a bit clattery, but it does. The problem is when it comes to doing these little tiny short ones, they're only 50 millimeters, less than 2 inches. In order to hold that, I've got to get my fingers inside the blade guard. I certainly don't want to have my fingers inside any guard, thank you very much, let alone on a table saw with a dado head. So I was having to clamp them with a little trigger clamp like this. And it worked, but it wasn't great. This only holds it to the fence, it doesn't hold it down as well. So I could do with getting rid of this guard altogether. Now, I don't mean I'm going to use an unguarded dado head. I'm going to build the guarding into the jig. So to do that, I'm going to move this fence further back from where it is, closer to me about here. And then I'm going to fit some blocks of wood over the path of the dado head so that it keeps my fingers away from all that spinny stuff. And I'm also going to make the fence in two parts because I have to remove this stop block for every single cut, every separate setup. And instead I'm going to use an indexing peg so that I can cut one slot and then just move it up for all the others. And the only time I shall need to reset that is when I come, after I've done all this stuff here, and I come to do the last ones here at this end, I'll have to move the whole thing up. But that's only one repositioning instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different repositionings. Now I've moved my fence back closer to me and put a block over the exit hole so that when the dado blade has finished its cut, it's nowhere near my fingers at the back here. And I've put what was the original fence in a position so the notch from that is 30 millimeters from the position of the blade. So that goes on there like that. And it means that I can put another block on the front here to act as a guard on that side. There we go. So now, if I move it between there and there, that sort of distance, the blade is never exposed at all. I've got a little peg which fits in that notch there, and so I can index my pieces over that as we go along. Now, this is the material that I'm going to be using. It's beautiful, it really is. This is English Bog Oak, and this tree grew in England 6,000 years ago. When it died, it fell over into the bog and sank. And the bog excludes air, so there are no bacteria, no insects living in there at all. So the bog protects the log from rotting. And it sits there for 6,000 years, and the land gets drained so it can be farmed. And then one day, about 20 years ago, a farmer was going along in his tractor, minding his own business, and there was a big bang because he'd hit something hard, and it turned out to be a tree trunk. It was planked, it was put in a barn, and it sat there for the last 20 years. And a couple of months ago, I bought a board, and this is what it looks like. This modest-sized piece is very heavy. It weighs a ton. And you can see how much it's distorted from when it was cut. These would have been flat faces originally. And it varies in colour from a sort of chocolatey, slightly striped appearance here to almost black here. It's beautiful. All my stock needs to be very precisely prepared. And I did these using my drum sander over there. And the result is, when I've got two notches together, I can just push them with just hand pressure like that, and they go together very neatly. There are no gaps, but I don't need to use a hammer. And I've got all my pieces prepared, and they came out of a piece that was this long on the end there, and as wide as this board here. I've got enough to do the job, plus a few spares. I hope I don't need them because these are the least black. These are all cut very slightly over size. So for example, this one is going to make this piece here, and it's just a bit longer, so that I can get halving joints at these corners. I can cut the spare off afterwards, and that should make it easier to assemble. And I'm going to start by making a notch close to, but not right at, the end. So I've got a little spacer. The peg is 30mm away from the position of the blade. This is 25mm. So if I put that in there like that, I get a cut which is 5mm away from the end. Right, well, everything's done except for this bottom end here. And so I need to reset my jig. But before I move that stop, that peg, I'm going to go through every piece and check that I can use it. Because once I've moved that, I'll never get it in exactly the same place again. I was just about to unscrew my fence to slide it up when I realised that I don't have to. The peg isn't glued in, it's just pushed in snugly. So I've made another little block. The peg can go into that. and then this block can be clamped. So I'm going to put the cut there, so the peg needs to go about there. And it's not to 1/2 millimetre, so long as they're all the same. And the advantage of doing this is that when I come to assemble, if I discover something dreadful's happened, or something's got damaged, or I make a mistake, I certainly don't intend to make mistakes, but it happens, doesn't it? If I have to come back to this setup, the jig will be exactly the same, and the dado stack can be set up pretty repeatedly. So I hope I don't need to do that, but if the worst comes to the worst, then I can. So I can put one on that notch there like that and make my last cut. And so now I can assemble everything with halving joints, glue it together and clean them off. So while I do that, you go and have a cup of tea. These Mackintosh motifs have still got quite a bit of work to be done on them. On the reverse side, which we won't see, because the abalone needs to sit in a little tiny rebate. I've cut the rebates on my router table over there, and I did so by taking a flush trim bit and swapping the bearing for a slightly smaller one. And it's left me with a rebate of about 1/16 of an inch. But of course the corners need to be cleaned out. Now, my glasses really aren't strong enough for this. It doesn't help with it being black, of course. So I've got this little gadget, which looks a bit weird, but I tell you, this is excellent for close work. It really is good. It's even got little lights on it. Look. There we go. I'm using a corner chisel. This is quite a natty little tool. I don't use it very often. And it's a sort of sharpened piece of metal on a spring that you hit with a hammer, and it just takes the corner out for you nicely. It lines itself up automatically. And then for chiseling out, well, I've got a chisel, but actually for this I'm finding this little dinky hand router is very useful. Again, something I don't often use, but when I do, it's just superb. So, let's find a corner to do. If I were to make these again, I'd cut a bigger rebate. It doesn't need to be as tiny as 1/16 of an inch. I could easily double it to be 3 or even 4 millimeters. They would be less fiddly to clean out, and there would still be ample surface left for gluing to the fronts of the doors. So, just got a couple of dozen of those to do. When I've done that, I'm going to trim off these, the bits that stick out, the excess, and then this job is finished. So thank you for watching, and until the next time, enjoy your workshop. Cheerio!